Hello, welcome to another episode of Namtaro Talks. Today's episode will be a pretty broad topic. Traveling. Yeah, yippee. Who doesn't like traveling? Well, it depends traveling in what kind of context, whether it's local, national, or international, whether it be just driving or plane or some people have trained or, or just walking. That's traveling too. Just want to preface the episode by saying that it will be a bit over the place, all over the place. Not to mention, I may be kind of not in chronological order per se. There'll be some trips that I did well during my childhood or adolescence, or even trips from recently. And I may be name dropping places here and there. And maybe you, after name dropping some places, you might have a general context of my geographical area, which is the risk I take when I make these episodes. I also want to preface that I do not want to come off as being part of a certain socio-economic status. I mean, I take pride and find myself fortunate that I had the opportunities to travel to certain places. Some were out of serendipity, some were out of opportunity, and some I just put forth the effort myself. I also want to preface that when I say traveling, I don't mean just walking down the street or to the local grocery store. I would say at least intercity. So it's as good as a place to start as any other. Let's go with childhood. I remember used to think that taking a car ride to Bakersfield is pretty long and pretty far. And not the most interesting because there was this one freeway across the mountains that it goes back and forth, very windy, and then you go down the five. As you know, in California or pretty much the West Coast, there's several north-south freeways like the 101 and the 405 and the 5. Yeah, and the 5 is not very interesting. Each side is literally just two lanes and it's pretty straight, and sometimes you see or even smell cows. Okay, I know this is not the best way to start this episode, but it just goes to show that as a kid, you think certain distances and certain rides or certain places are like super far out there. You think that the world is really big. You think 4 hours is a long time, which it is. And then you have a 6 hour drive to Palmdale or Valencia. Then you start to understand the context of just the car travel. And then there's also plane travel, like 8 hours to drive to San Diego is about a 1 hour flight or slightly over. And I know I have a tendency to speak in second person. So it's interesting. It's only for these podcasts that I speak in second person. So you either speak as first person, referring to I or me, or third person, like he or she does this, he or she does that. But second person, it's very rare. You rarely see that in the book. You rarely see that when someone talks. I just inadvertently become second person sometimes. But yeah, over time, it's like a giant mix, hullabaloo of jambalaya of different kinds of modes of travel, different kinds of distances, different contexts, whether it just be for exploration or a vacation or visiting a friend or a family member. Sometimes it's travel due to word of mouth. Like you hear many people go to a certain place, you hear how awesome it is, so you make plans to go there for yourself. Sometimes it's kind of like a bucket list. So over time, you begin to accumulate places where you want to travel, whether it be close or far, and you go there kind of to check it off, to say that you did it and that you experience all the good things that it had to offer. And sometimes it's as good as people say it is, and sometimes it's not as it's cracked up to be, and that's okay. And sometimes it's a matter of circumstances too. Maybe you just had a bad experience, or it happened to rain that day, or the weather was terrible, or the crowd was too big. So unfortunately, you gotta roll the dice a little bit when you travel too. The odds are, if you have a good idea, everyone has that same good idea, and everyone does the same good idea at the same time, and it gets pretty crowded. And the different contexts of travel, or the trips that someone else plans for you and you just go along, or the trips that you have to plan yourself. Of course, as a kid, your parents plan most of your trips. They plan all the logistics, like the flights and the lodging and the activities and itinerary, not to mention the finances. But you just go along and you just experience whatever is presented to you, and you try to make the most of it. You try to be grateful. Unfortunately, travel for Americans is considered a luxury, and most people don't have the means to do so as easily. Not to mention, adults go to work, kids go to school, adults gotta take it's like time off or sick leave or PTO, and kids gotta wait for the breaks, like spring break, mid winter break, winter break. Yeah, so I feel for my parents, well, especially my dad, who had to plan most of our trips around our school breaks. And I admit, as a kid, there were times we were a bit indignant because school sucks. I will be honest. Like, who does like going to school? So when you get a break, whether it's Thanksgiving or Christmas, you just want to chill at home. You just want to play video games or read or hang out with friends or cousins and outside of a school context. But oh my God, you gotta go on this trip, and you can't really say no because like your parents already planned it for you and they look forward to it and they want to share a new experience with you. But in retrospect, that's probably a better experience. That's probably a better memory that you went somewhere, you did something, that you did this with close people that you care about, rather than just be a vegetable at home or do things that you could do any other time. And as you grow up, you get a little bit more agency. But this is going from, I guess, childhood and preteen towards adolescence. When you travel, your preferences begin to change. Sometimes you get a little bit bored or you want to explore a little bit more, but you feel a bit restrained because you're under the constraints of your parents. I remember a couple of tours where our family was literally the youngest people on the bus, or except the tour guide. And it was enjoyable in its own right. But of course, I did not fully understand and appreciate all the nuances and the history and the culture of the tours we were on at that age. Looking back, all I remember was, okay, we went on that tour to that place, whether it be in the van or on the bus. And growing up, I feel sympathy for in the context of the planner. Well, in this case, it was my dad most of the time, because you plan something, whether it be a trip or an event or anything really, and the person you plan it for or around doesn't fully have a good time, you kind of take it to heart. You feel a little bit responsible. I guess two good examples I could use for traveling, or two places that I went to pretty often and at different stages in my life. The first would be Washington, D.C. It was to visit some family members. Of course, I would stay at their family member's place and enjoy their house, but you gotta live by the house rules. And when you're a kid, you're kind of immature. You kind of break the rules and you disturb the neighbors, and their hosts feel kind of liable for you. Washington, D.C., I learned about a new form of travel through the subway system, through the metro. I learned about all the different stops, and you gotta hop on, hop off, change lines, go a certain amount of stops, and you get to appreciate the convenience of it all. The one time we did take the Amtrak from Washington, D.C. to New York, and that was enjoyable in its own right. Over time, you get to see different kinds of environments and climates. You get to realize what is an urban setting, what is a suburban setting, what is a rural setting. And of course, what's dry, what's humid, what's cold, what's hot, even what's like snowy. Based on the context of several podcasts, you pretty much know that I'm from California. So from California, or especially in Northern California, they mention places like Yosemite and Lake Tahoe pretty often. And the one part about traveling in your formative years, well, formative could be during childhood or adolescence, is that it forms certain memories. Of course, you gotta be a little bit older enough to remember and appreciate those memories. I mean, I don't remember where the heck I went at 3. I was told I went to Disneyland at least once around somewhere between 1 and 3 and 4 years old, but I don't remember that trip at all. But anyways, yeah, with Yosemite and Lake Tahoe, I remember the first time I went to the snow. I mean, I experienced snow a little bit later, as in, I think it was late elementary or middle school, but it was fun, and I had snowball fights with my cousins and my friends, and we went with my dad's friends too, and we had a cabin, and the balcony had a whole bunch of snow. And then when my dad's friends would come out to the driveway or the garage, we'd throw snowballs at them, and they'd throw snowballs at us. And I remember sledding with toboggans and saucers, whether it be sledding parks or sometimes even in the street. I remember one time we took a trash can lid and started sledding down that. And of course, with snow activities, it eventually progressed to some skiing and snowboarding. Okay, back to Vietnam and Washington, D.C. Yeah, so I go to Washington, D.C. to visit relatives at different ages of my life. As a child, as a teenager, eventually as a college student, grad school student, a working adult. I remember the one time that my parents sent my brother and I to Washington, D.C. by ourselves. Yeah, we were in elementary school at the time. Well, I think not super young, I guess like 10 or 11. Of course, we were under the supervision of the flight attendants, but they thought we were all cute and whatnot, and we got to pass out peanuts. And in Washington, D.C., we got to explore pretty much everything it has to offer. The Smithsonian Museum, all the monuments, and the Potomac River with little paddle boating, even going to my aunt's house in Alexandria and watching my uncle and his friends like set up the volleyball net and play volleyball with each other, even though I couldn't play because I was too small and too young at the time. But eventually, with future trips, the relatives began to give me a bit more agency. Like I get to do my own due diligence and take the metro on my own and figure out which stops to get on and get off. Get to explore the National Mall and the surrounding areas of that with all the Smithsonian museums. Though it was crazy. I don't know how or why I did six of the museums in like 3 hours. Also explore DuPont Circle and Georgetown. These are all places that family members likely took me to when I was young, but I didn't fully appreciate or understand it. But I had the agency to take a solo trip on the metro on my own and plan my own schedule and prepare accordingly, bring my own snacks, have my own money, bring my own water and backpack. Albeit I was a bit by myself at the time, but it felt liberating. It had a kind of freedom. And as a matter of fact, it was a precursor to many other wanderlust walking trips that I did on my own in the future. Because at that age, like the adults, they begin to understand and respect you a little bit more. They know you don't want to be stuck and cooped up with them all day. They understand that you'll be in contact, that you're independent and can explore on your own, and that you'll be home at a reasonable hour. I guess another couple wanderlust journeys were that of BART. So in the California, San Francisco Bay Area, or Northern California, there is a train system called the BART, and it takes you to several cities. Honestly, it is not the best quality, and it's a little bit inconvenient to get to a BART station. As a matter of fact, they were building one near my parents' home, but it took about 5 or 6 years to fully build it. But once it popped up, like 2 other ones popped up pretty conveniently. Some people use the BART as a means of commuting. I used it as a sense of adventure. Then the main city area we used to go to was, of course, San Francisco. I used to love San Francisco. I used to like all the stores and like the mall and the Union Square and walking a little bit and you get to Chinatown. As a matter of fact, we did that for the class field trip a couple of times. Though one of the times, my classmates and I, we ditched the Chinatown and then we went to Japantown instead. Remember one year I injured my leg and I was in the cast and I still went on the Chinatown field trip in San Francisco. Just hobbling around the hilly streets on my crutches. You realize what a beast San Francisco is, and then you're kind of a bit more presumptuous to take the public transportation system, not to go to not just Japantown, but also eventually make your way to Fisherman's Wharf and Pier 39. Of course, you explore the own tourist things, such as, of course, the Golden Gate Bridge, and you look at Alcatraz from a distance, and then eventually one time you go to Alcatraz, and of course you would go to San Francisco's unsightly cousin, Oakland, albeit not really to explore Oakland, but I did do that one time when I was in grad school, just a solo BART adventure. But you kind of realize that Oakland has its own charms and that they are trying. It has a lot of problems and there's very unsightly areas, but they got the Lake Merritt and the Jack London Square. Then you live in the Bay Area so long, but there are many aspects of it you not fully explore yet, and you kind of become a downtown connoisseur. I got to like the downtowns of Mountain View, Cupertino, Sunnyvale, Saratoga, Campbell, even San Jose, believe it or not. And you get even more exploratory and adventurous. The two main colleges in the San Francisco Bay Area, I would say, are Berkeley and Stanford. I mean, there's a whole bunch of other colleges too, but those are the two that are the most popular. And then you get to appreciate the beautiful Stanford campus and the history behind it, and of course all the bricks. And Berkeley, my mom's alma mater, you get to go along International Boulevard and you see all the different multicultural stores and restaurants. Though personally, I don't think I would have wanted to go to Berkeley. I was not smart enough to go to Berkeley anyways, but it seems a bit overwhelming to me because the students they accept are of a higher academic standard, which I definitely did not meet. But that's okay. I get to explore the campus on my own time. And a couple hidden gems around the Bay Area, like, of course, Mission Peak, Mount Diablo, Half Moon Bay, and other little nooks and crannies in cities like Los Gatos, San Mateo, and Coyote Hills National Park. I mean, Regional Park. National Park. We wish. Oh, yeah, I think I mentioned Half Moon Bay already. Yeah, and of course, you go north of the Golden Gate Bridge and you find out there's another city there called like Sausalito. And then you have to go to another city on the other side called Tiburon. That's where you take the ferry to go to Angel Island. You go even more north and you get to explore cities like Santa Rosa, which has I call it the Snoopy Museum. And of course, some couple wine country cities like Sonoma and Napa and Mendocino is pretty cool too. I don't want this episode to be a Northern California Bay Area centered episode, but I can't help it. There's just many cool places that you get to explore up here, many little nooks and crannies. Because even if you go south of that area, you get to go to Santa Cruz with the California Beach Boardwalk in the warm California sun. Just like that one commercial used to say. You get to walk along the pier. You learn there's a whole bunch of little cities around there that are cool with the colorful houses, such as Aptos and Capitola. And you go down a little bit more, you get to Monterey. And of course, nearby it has Carmel by the Sea and the 17-mile drive, and where each little stop is a different view of the beach. And of course, the Monterey has its own wharf and the famous Monterey Bay Aquarium and a bunch of little national parks near there, like Point Lobos State Natural Reserve. And you go down farther along the coast and you go to get to Big Sur. Though I will not go too much detail. Yeah, too much California regional areas. But even with different areas and cities that I am at different points in my life, like even Davis, California, it's near Sacramento, the state capital. You find out there's many historical like landmarks and charms in the Capitol building and the famous Yellow Bridge. And Davis, it's a college town, but it's like one of the best downtowns I've been to. A lot of charm, a lot of regional restaurants. Can't forget the Burgers and Brew restaurant. And the campus is really beautiful also. And of course, there's always the picnic day at Davis, where it's like the busiest, craziest day in Davis. But I recently went and they really tapered it down. So it's a lot more calmer and family friendly. Thank goodness. And then you go to Sacramento. And I did not know there was like a Vietnamese plaza in Sacramento also. And it's very similar to San Jose. And of course, Fresno is in the Central Valley of California. But it has many of its own like charms and idiosyncrasies there too. Like the underground garden and the local park and its sister city Clovis, which is like right next door to it. And then you go down a little bit, you get to Selma, which is considered the raisin capital of the world. I got a friend in Selma. You go to Kingsburg, which is a Swedish town, and a little bit down to Visalia, which is the city right before another national park, Sequoia National Park, which has like the biggest tree in California, apparently. And of course, Fresno is pretty close to Yosemite National Park. You just go up to 41 a bit. And then, but you gotta plan accordingly. You have to go either pretty early or like on an off day, or else you'll be just driving through it. There is literally no parking spot for you. And sometimes unfortunately, you gotta roll the dice because it depends on the weather. Sometimes it's super hot, sometimes it could be raining. And there's the city of Mariposa. Mariposa means butterfly. It's a small city, but I remember going ziplining there. That was pretty fun too. All right, let's go down south. Sometimes you are a little bit exploratory with Southern California. Of course, you know about Los Angeles, and Anaheim is where Disneyland is, but then there's a whole bunch of other theme parks there, like California theme park, and I'm sure there's like Star Wars Land, and San Diego is cool too. There's the San Diego Zoo and Legoland. And I later learned about Balboa Park. And of course, UC San Diego near La Jolla. That's pretty beautiful also. Then you learn that Southern California is not one giant conglomerate like Northern California. Even though Northern California is really in the middle of California, not at the very top, that would be Redding. But Southern California, it's like LA is like a dozen bunch of little cities, and you get to figure out what area is known for what, which areas are Asian, like the San Gabriel Valley, and which areas, or maybe a bit more affluent, like Irvine. And of course, they got another Vietnamese plaza down there. Oh, gee, I wonder what race I am now. Yeah, you know the song California Love with Tupac and Dr. Dre, and they name drop a whole bunch of cities and areas. And of course, Compton, Long Beach, Inglewood. Okay, that's a different song. Though personally, I wouldn't go to Compton at my own will. But you go to Long Beach, you try Roscoe's Chicken and Waffles for the first time, and it is worth the hype. And of course, you're in the Southern California, you gotta know about the Porto's Bakery, which is a family-owned Cuban bakery with several branches exclusively to Southern California. And of course, after a while, you realize a lot of the chains that I know, like 85 Degree Bakery and Tasty and Seven Leaves, they started down in Southern California. And you're like, oh man, I wish they had it in Northern California. I have to go back down here and check out all these chains every single time. But eventually they branch out. They made it their way to the north. And we're like, oh, thank goodness. Of course, shout out to Crystal Cove State Park, which has one of the nicest, beautiful beaches that I've been to. Several good memories there also. Shout out to Santa Barbara also. It's a bit out there, a little bit northwest of Los Angeles area, but it has its beaches and its own charm. And you learn about different nooks and crannies and sites in California, like Solvang, which is a small Danish town. Of course, Pismo Beach, Morro Bay. You go by San Luis Obispo. I never been to Hart's Castle because it was a bit expensive, and you gotta reserve the tickets ahead of time to get through there. But that's there also. That's pretty cool. But over time, your capacity and your means, it changes and it expands. Before you were subject to, I guess, your parents giving you a ride, or maybe some local public transportation. And for me, it was the BART. And then eventually there was the friend who had the car, and then the friend would take you. And eventually you get like a hand-me-down, which is totally fine, like a car. And I was just happy to have a car. But because for me, a car, it meant freedom. I get to go wherever I want, whenever I want, but in a responsible manner, of course. And I try not to do anything super crazy because I know that I was still a student at the time and I had to pay for gas, which was my parents' money. And that's the thing about travel. Unfortunately, it does cost money, especially in America. But that does not mean that you're going to save money and just restrict yourself to being local. There's different levels of travel. It depends what you want to get out of traveling. Like, how far are you willing to go? Like, or what means are you willing to do to get there? Or what are you looking for when you get there? Are you there just to hang out downtown or see nature? Nature is usually much more affordable. Or do you want to try fancy restaurants? Or do you want to go to the tourist areas? Or are you staying at a friend's place? Or you have a hotel or an Airbnb? Or are you staying overnight, or are you gonna just day trip it? Yeah, many factors take into account of the capacity to travel, the nature of the trip, it's like where you are at in life. Sometimes you travel for many different experiences. Sometimes it's with friends, or with a significant other, or with family, or even by yourself. I'll be honest, it's liberating. It broadens your horizons. It opens up your mind a little bit. You learn that there are other worlds out there. There's different perspectives besides your daily life, besides where you currently are in life, whether it be at a certain job or being a student at a certain time in your life. Not just stuck to the constraints of your family and local friends and the people you see every day. And sometimes you know that the grass isn't always greener on the other side. Like I say, some places are cool to travel to, but I wouldn't live there. I know I've been mostly interstate so far, but let's go a little bit national and eventually international. Yeah, so you already know I went to Washington, D.C., but of course over the years and the times I had the means to go to New Jersey, and I didn't know that there were all these little areas and cities nearby. I didn't know that they were townships, like New Brunswick and Piscataway, of course, Edison and Hoboken. I didn't know how close all those cities and areas along the East Coast, or states really, were to each other. Like maybe Philadelphia is a few hours away from New Jersey. And then you got to figure out the geography over there and figure out the different means of transportation. Of course, there's a certain train you go from New Jersey to get into New York, and once you get to New York, you do the New York subway system, and you gotta figure out the right routes to take you to the heart of the areas that you want to explore, whether it be a Times Square or Central Park or Statue of Liberty or Empire State Building or New York's Chinatown or Queens or Flushing. I'll be honest, I don't know much about New York, but the times I went there, I did enjoy it. I enjoy a hot dog and a cookie and a pizza and a Broadway play every now and then. Of course, I went to Florida several times. Yeah, I went to Miami. It was cool, but honestly, I think I was a teenager or in like my late teens or early 20s at the time, and I went with my family, and it's fine to me. The beaches were nice though. I'll give it that. Though unfortunately, a lot of high rises near the beach that kind of blocks the ocean view. Orlando's cool too. It has its own history and its own charm. It's known for Disney World. I got family out in Orlando, though not my favorite city. Like personally, I wouldn't live in Orlando. Yeah, honestly, I don't like places that are too car centric. I like places where traffic is expected, but it's nice to have options. Not like, oh, the only way to get from point A to point B is to drive really far on this freeway or to be stuck in traffic. And I know that eliminates a lot of America, but you try to find a place that has a good balance of both. And you take transportation and accessibility into account. That's what Washington, D.C. and New York has over the other places. The subway system, the public transportation. And I'll make another episode about this matter in the future. Yeah, like Texas. I had family in Houston, and it's like a giant circle. And like the freeways, the highways are huge, like 7, 8 lane highways. I never seen anything like that in my life. I went to downtown Texas. I visited a couple of temples. Of course, gotta go to a Waffle House. And shout out to the family members who let me borrow their cars whenever I visited them in certain areas. Because I think those members, they were home at the time or they were doing something else. But yeah, you could really get into the nitty gritty and exploratory aspects of a city or a region or any place you go to, whether it be by car on your own or just walking, believe it or not. All right, we will go international a little bit. I only went to Europe once, but that was to hit up 3 different Eastern European cities with my family. That would be Budapest in Hungary, Prague in Czech Republic, and Vienna in Austria. I like the Czech Republic because, especially with the walking tour, and you get to see all the little cobblestones and the architecture and the Charles Bridge, where let's just say I made a wish that came true. And of course, Vienna, Austria, they promoted Mozart everywhere, and you get to go up to a couple of castles, and they promote the Sound of Music movie there a lot too. So I forgot the name of it, but I remember going to a skull museum during that European trip, and I really liked it. Another thing I come to notice from my travels is that the major cities are usually near bodies of water, whether it be a lake or a river, or at least if there's a bridge nearby. It gets pretty interesting. You see people crossing it often. We're approaching towards the time limit, so I've been to Asia, of course, but I think I'll save that for the next episode. Well, anyways, another form of travel is the cruise. So you're pretty much on a ship, and it has a bunch of activities and a bunch of food and a bunch of shows, whether it be plays, believe it or not, and musicals. I got to watch Chicago one time, and a couple of cover bands. I saw a cover band of ABBA and the Eagles. A couple of pretty entertaining comedy shows too. Went to Mexico with the family several times. Of course, Puerto Vallarta is old reliable. You can stay at the resort. You can just walk along to the local town. That's on the west coast of Mexico. On the east coast, of course, you have Cancun. Beautiful beaches there. Of course, a little bit of history. You take the bus a little bit. You go to Chichen Itza, which are these pyramids. But oh yes, the cruise, and you get to go to different regions like Mazatlan, or even to some of the Caribbean countries like Costa Rica or Haiti, Puerto Rico, or Jamaica. Well, it's a context of a cruise. So you get there and they drop you off for a few hours and you hang out, you go to some gift shops, you take in the sights, then you get back on the ship. And can't go wrong with an Alaska cruise. You get to see the trees and the icebergs. Yeah, and shout out to Canada, man. I went to Canada, went to Montreal, of course Toronto, though it was fine. For some reason, I just remember we went to Toronto and my family, my aunts and uncles wanted to go to Chinatown to get pho. I'm like, come on, man. But Banff National Park in Canada, now that is a must see. I recommend to everyone. And you get pretty spoiled around that area too, because you get to stay in a little resort cabin, but the downtown is very walkable, or you could bike down. It's literally mountains and trees everywhere around the town. Or when you drive to the next park or this park or that park or this lake, you're surrounded by mountains and trees. Of course, a nearby city called Canmore, that was cool. And of course, we flew in through Calgary Airport. Calgary's a nice city also. And can't go wrong with Montreal. Went to Montreal at least twice in my life. Once to visit a family member, another time to hang out with my aunt and my cousins. Very French influence, has their own Chinatown also. But nice pier, a nice little downtown area. One time my cousin and I found a speakeasy bar there. And with a recent trip, I went to Vancouver. And I'll be honest, it was decent, but not my favorite place also. But it had a lot of sites. I see how international it is. Of course, people of certain demographics are getting more prominent there. But a lot of food options, of course, public markets, and near a body of water. So you already know. Not to mention a lot of parks, a lot of nature, and of course the Capilano suspension bridge that's popular. All right, two more places before I dip for the next episode. Yeah, Seattle and Portland. I'll start with Seattle because it was been a bit more recent. Yeah, so I've been to Seattle, I think at least 3 times by now. Of course, can't go wrong with the Pike's Place Market, with the waterfront and the park and the flowers and the fruit and the meat and the underground stores. And of course, the Space Needle's decent, but you go to one tall tower, you've been to them all, pretty much. And Portland was pleasant a couple of times I went there. They say keep Portland weird, and of course they got their voodoo donuts, and got a good food scene, and the whole street or block with a whole bunch of food carts. Though I hope it's still safe. I hope it's not crazy over there now. Yeah, I remember I went to Portland with a couple of friends while they're doing continuing education. I was wandering around Portland on my own. I was using the rent a electric scooter and a little bus and public transportation. Get some ice cream, go to the Rose Garden, go to Powell's bookstore, go to this burger restaurant where they serve ridiculous burgers where the buns are made of grilled cheese sandwiches. But when my friends were done with their Con Ed class, they joined me and we revisited some places for their enjoyment. And of course, can't forget Multnomah Falls, which is a little bit east of Portland. Well, I guess this ended up being a 2-part episode. Well, which might as well. Next time I will talk about Vietnam, China, and Japan for sure. So many other Asian places I want to go to eventually, like Thailand, South Korea, Taiwan. I likely won't get a chance to do so anytime soon, but if the opportunity presents itself, I'll go. Yeah, I did not get to share too many opinions about traveling in general, but I'll likely do that in the next episode. Well, once again, thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye.